Hey, Enneagram 6's, I am doing your video over because I talked way too much about Enneagram 6's, so apparently I just love Enneagram 6's. I wing 6, FYI. Anyway, this video is about health, kind of an investigation into your current health, and if you are unhealthy, what that may look like so that you have better verbiage and language and awareness to see what's going on inside your heart and your make and your type. So what I think I'm going to do, just because I talk too much about you guys, is talk a little bit about what the impact of COVID has been and the mitigation efforts, kind of just from my own perspective. You probably have your own thoughts as well. And then apply that to the Enneagram 6 to see what it's doing inside of you. And then just ask about 5 different questions to see where you're at, to kind of parse out through Enneagram language and the framework of that to see where you're at. So when I think about the COVID-19 epidemic, worldwide epidemic, and how it's impacting us, I think about what the government has done to mitigate that. And while that is wise and smart and good, it does have secondary impacts on us. And so specifically with everybody, not just Enneagram 6's, you're looking at things like social isolation, you're looking at disruption of your daily habits, you're looking at uncertainty and fear and anger and boredom, and all kinds of other things, grief and loss. And that core experience people are having is impacting everybody. What's interesting is how it's impacting you guys as 6's. And so what I want to do is just briefly go over what a 6, the description of a 6 is, and your motivations, and then we'll jump into the 5 questions just to kind of review and get fresh in our mind what a 6 is like. So 6's are fantastic. 6's are very, very good thinkers. Typically the way 6's think is different than 5's and 7's, with some parsing out of, that's an overgeneralization, but it's typically you're a contrarian thinker, meaning that you try to defeat an idea in order to move ahead with it. And so if you can't defeat it, then it's probably a good idea. Typically 6's have in their minds a kind of, a panel of thought. So they have multiple different opinions and ideas running through their head, and they can take devil's advocate positions and try to argue in their own head, and so they have a council. That's the word I'm looking for, a council of thought in their heads. They're typically very, very trustworthy, and they will build a group around them to get input and support, and so it's not uncommon for a 6 to have different spheres. Kind of like, well, I won't say that. You have different spheres of friends, so you have your inner huddle that you trust, and if a person can demonstrate trust to you, you draw them in, and then you have different concentric circles of trust, and so you do that as a 6 typically because you want support, and you're loyal, and 6's are very, very loyal once trust has been established. 6's have kind of a love-hate relationship with authority. But typically, if it's a trustworthy authority that's been proven true, we're good with that. That authority can be people. That authority can be God. That authority can be an abstract philosophy. It can be all kinds of things. But these are kind of some of the hallmark features of 6's. Now, the motivations of a 6, you'll remember that every number, not just you, avoids something, pursues something that they believe makes them whole. Something that they wrestle with, you know about it, you wrestle with it, you can't seem to kick it, and then something you long to hear. So the things that 6 avoids is fear itself. Specifically, if that's not helpful, a fear of lacking support or security or guidance. So 6's fear being targeted or blamed or abandoned. 6's fear not being able to be safe, and they fear not being able to be guided in a decision. 6's believe that support and security will make them whole. So if they can somehow manage the worst case scenario, or if they can manage their relationships or just their life in general and make it safe, then that is what will make them whole. So with that, sixes typically struggle with anxiety, and anxiety not necessarily in the clinical sense, right? So anxiety can impact any number on the Enneagram, but it is the idea of fear, of worst case scenario. It's the idea of if something happens, I need an A, B, and C plan. It's in a sense control. But they do deal with this constant vigilance and worry and awareness of what could go wrong, which is good and bad, but it is a struggle inside the six. And sixes obviously long just to hear you're safe and you're secure. So that's kind of what COVID very briefly just mentioned. Like I have so much, you will not be shocked that I have a ton of information and I'm only covering like a third of it. It's just my nature. And I only can put up like 14 minutes on YouTube, so that's what this is. So that's a very brief review of like COVID implication. We could spend 14 minutes just on that, and just a review of your type. Now here's the meat of it. Here's 5 questions to ask yourself. The first is this: prior to COVID, so like in January, were you in a place of health or stress? I will in a second tell you how to figure that out, but that's important because crisis and in this sense COVID just is highlighting what was already there. And so you need to know how healthy or unhealthy was I in January. A way to do that is in the Enneagram they have like 9 levels of health, where 1 is like you're certifiable and 9 is like you're a guru sitting on top of a mountain. And so what I've done is just taken those 9 levels, broke them into 3, unhealthy, average, and healthy, and given some language to kind of ponder. So an unhealthy 6, a 6 that would fall into level 9 through 7, would be passive-aggressive, would be having a persecution complex, and would be just simply panicked. You would lose all control. You would be obviously passive-aggressive, you know what that means, and you would think people are out to get you. That would be a very unhealthy 6. If you're thinking about January and you think, well, that wasn't necessarily me, average 6s are typically highly sarcastic, are prone to blame, and are prone to be indecisive. And so if you think about yourself in January, was it hard for you to make decisions? If you did make decisions, did you go about it around and around in your head? Did you find yourself shifting the burden or responsibility either fully or in part onto other people? Things like that. And then a healthy 6 is usually dedicated and loyal and pretty independent, meaning that you might have a council of friends and people giving you input, but you can kind of figure it out yourself. So think about that first. Were you healthy before COVID or unhealthy? So pause this video and think about that for a second. Okay, the second thought is this. So when you think about that very brief list of COVID implications, fear, boredom, anger, uncertainty of the future, which ones seem to strike you the most when you think about that? I've got a list of things that I think might impact a 6. You might have other ideas, that's totally fine, but think about these. What about uncertainty? Is that impacting you? So you think about the landscape of COVID, its implications on social, relational, emotional life. Do you feel like there's endless options? Like there's all kinds of things that could happen and you're not quite sure. There's no clear solution. The future is uncertain and you are just wrapped in like self-doubt, not quite sure what to do. That would, to me, strike a 6 deeply because, again, 6s fear being targeted, unsupported, and without guidance and security. With an uncertain future, you are not supported, and with an uncertain future, you are not secure, and you probably don't know what's going to happen. So to me, it would seem like one of the main things that would be pressing against a 6 is uncertainty. And with that, closely on its heels is simply fear. If 6s deal with fear, which they do, then think about like just the COVID situation, right? What if I get sick? What if my job, all of the what ifs, right? I'm not going to go through it. I don't want to trigger anybody. But like fear, right? Fear is probably pressing on you in some degree. And then isolation. So think about the 6 again. If a 6 is typically wanting to gather a trusted group of people around them to both build security and input on guidance, and you then put in a relational blockade, so to speak, on how often people can meet and to what degree of depth they can communicate, because let's just be honest, Zoom is not that deep, then that's going to be hard for the 6. So think about those three things: fear, uncertainty, and isolation. Is that impacting you? And if it is, how? So pause the video and think about that for a second. And then think about this for number 3. So 6s are very good at thinking. So your natural bent when you get information is to process it intellectually. That is your gift and your strength. That doesn't mean you don't have emotions, and that doesn't mean you don't act, but it does mean that you primarily focus on life through your head and through your mind. And that's good, but the question is, are you balancing that both with appropriate action and emotion? So you have all these thoughts, great, but are you processing your emotions? Do you know what they are? That's why it's important to do like insight work like this, where they come from and what you're going to do about it. And likewise, are you going to have appropriate action? Not action that's frivolous and just ramped up because you're trying to do something to protect your security, or is it wise action? Is it measured action? Those would be things to think about as well. So you can write about that as you think about that. Are you engaged and balanced in your thinking and your action and your emotions? The fourth thing is to look at just your stress and health lines. So remember that 6s in health move towards a healthy 9. So when they do that, they become less fearful and less pessimistic and become a lot more relaxed and optimistic like a 9. Vice versa, when 6s become unhealthy, they move towards 3s, where they become more competitive, a little more arrogant, and a little more frantic in activity. So it makes sense. If you are devolving, if you're getting less healthy, the tendency is to move towards action and like, let's do a lot, like what can we do to fix this kind of a thing. Or it can be easy to move towards your intellectual powers, where you then become a little more competitive and arrogant and maybe condescending. These are tendencies in the 6 personality. So be thinking about that. Is that impacting at all in your life? And then in the last one, which is just naming your coping mechanism. So 6s have a coping mechanism of, there's 2, of blame, and which is projection, but blame, and something called splitting, which is basically moving everyone into a for me or against me category. And so think about like your home life, your work life, your mental life, emotional life. Do you see that anywhere? Do you see blame landing on your spouse or your children without kind of an inward eye towards yourself? Do you see an us versus them mentality? Especially hard, like with COVID, when you're dealing with a disease, it almost presses you against your neighbor. Like, are they sick? Like, whoa, danger. And so just be thinking about those kinds of things. So all that to be said, I made yours a lot shorter, not that short. But the importance of this is if you can name what's going on in your heart in a lot more detail, it builds awareness, yes, but then it's able to draw that out of you so that you can show that to Jesus so that he can do deep work inside your heart, because he wants to. And just to close, like, if you are the same person at the end of COVID that you were at the beginning, then you're missing an opportunity, and you're missing the point. Like, none of us would have picked COVID, I don't think. But nevertheless, it's been thrust upon us. So you don't have an option. You have to choose. Are you going to grow? And I think God wants to grow you as much as he grows any other Enneagram number. So I love you. I'll see you guys later. Love, 6s.